Hello everybody, welcome to Comedian MTG. I am your host Ian. Today I'm going to be taking you through some competitive EDH gameplay. I am bringing to the table a very spicy deck today that I've been working on for several weeks, if not a month at this point. It is Winota, Joiner of Forces. Now, before you shut off the video and before you go running away saying, Ian's crazy, he's playing a Boros deck, this deck is actually pretty insane. It is the first time we've ever really had a proactive stacks option, and I think it's really competitive at these tables. I've played upwards of 20-something games with this deck at this point, and if it hasn't won a game, it has been a factor in the game. It has presented the win, it has put pressure on the board, and has slowed down players. Now, stacks is a very hard option for a lot of players, but I think this deck actually is proactive enough and has efficient combos and really can go for the win. Let's take a closer look at Winota. She reads, whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a human creature from among them onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains indestructible until the end of turn, and you put the rest in the bottom in a random order. So the strategy of the deck is to land an early non-human creature. One with evasion, or maybe one that has an onboard stacks effect. We then attack with these creatures, triggering Winota and flipping over our A+B combos, like Village Bellringer, Combat Celebrant, and Zealous Conscripts. Now these creatures are very important because they combo with Splinter Twin and Kiki Jiki to make infinite creatures and infinite damage. Now in the deck there's also some combos with Conspicuous Snoop, but those can be pretty lengthy to explain, so I'll link my primer down below with the explanation on how to go through those. Alright, so now you know the deck, let's check out the players today. Up first we have Thrasios playing the first Sliver. Then in second is me, and I'm on Winota. Coming in third is Looter Scooter from the Dockside Extortionist on her Dirtle Control Thrasios Kraum deck. And finally we have Scott from the Notion Thieves who is on Thrasios Tymna Midrange Console. Now, if you look right there, you'll notice I'm down to 5, which is not good. But let's check out that 5. Alright, so I'm working with a Plateau, a Wooded Foothills, a Thalia, a Mana Vault, and an Arcane Signet. Now you'll notice that this hand is extremely explosive, but also can run the risk of running out of gas. So that's the big risk when you keep a hand like this, but on the other hand, I can get down a turn 1 Mana Vault into an Arcane Signet into a Thalia. Now let's get this show on the road. So Foss is going to start us off, and he plays a Command Tower. When you're playing against the first Sliver, you expect some combination of early acceleration, usually in the form of Mana Dorks, because they help with the food chain combo itself. So the Birds of Paradise here really wasn't that surprising. What was surprising, however, was this Mystic Remora. Uh-oh. So I'm not gonna lie, this is really bad, because it forces me into a really greedy position here where I am basically forced to feed this fish not only twice, but my draw for turn ends up being a Smuggler's Copter, so I'm gonna have to feed it 3 times, which is like normally a play I super don't advocate for, but I'm playing a very proactive deck on a multi-5. There's literally nothing I can do in this scenario, so I've just gotta create a scenario where I can play my cards and just get the game done with. Now you may be wondering why I said I had to play that Smuggler's Copter here. One, if I play Thalia, it doesn't really affect this table too much. This is like a pretty green heavy table, and I don't think turn 1 it's actually very effective. 2, I'm really hoping to curve into Winota here. So having a non-human creature to curve into is actually much more important. The last and final reason is that I am on that multi-5, so Smuggler's Copter, when creatures come down, being able to loot and fix my hand is really important. Now we just see a land pass here from Looter, and then a land into a Dork from Scott. So these are pretty fair starts for my opponents, except for Foss. Now this is the danger zone, right? We've just given him 3 cards. Now Foss pays for fish, which either could mean A, they're not about to combo off this turn, or B, they want combo protection. It's hard to tell. And now comes the Gitaxian Probe, which ends up being very important later in the game. Pay attention specifically to the cards in hand that Looter shows, because they actually end up making a big deal later. While Foss is drawing off his probe, Scoots decided to show off his lovely proxy. Gotta love it. Ladies and gentlemen, here comes the Mana Dump. Chrome Mox pitching Dark Rip, Mana Crypt into a Carpet of Flowers into a Fyndhorn Elf. So what's subtly important about what just happened is, this is great for me, because last turn we fed the heck out of that fish, but Foss just played a ton of different mana effects, and the first Sliver is not a card advantage engine, meaning it seems that Foss didn't draw a single tutor or a piece to set up the food chain combo. It seems like nothing good came out of the fact that the fish got fed, which is awesome for us because that means that they just have mana and no card advantage. So I untap for my second turn, and I get pretty lucky here because I draw one of my best engines in the deck. I draw a Goblin Rabblemaster. Now, Rabblemaster is not normally a cEDH card, but it is insane with Winota because not only does it create a hasty threat the turn it comes out, but it also makes a threat every single turn. So when you curve Rabblemaster into Winota, that's automatically 3 Winota triggers right there. Now here I get to loot with the Smuggler's Copter and get rid of that Thalia, because as I mentioned, it really isn't doing any work for me in this pod. And with some damage dealt, I get to pass the turn. Now my main target for damage at this point is Thrasios just because mana-wise he's so far ahead. I actually really don't mind seeing Dirtle Control have a very slow start here just because I don't think I'm going to get any spells thrown at me. Now Rhystic Study down here is a little bit of a pain just because I'm really tight on mana right now and I need another land drop if I'm going to hit Winota, so it's not great because I'll probably have to give Scott at least one card. Now we see Foss once again paying for fish, still indicating that he really has nothing in hand to go off with. Now if you notice the hand motions here, I tried to convince Foss to target me with Carpet of Flowers, but does not go over too well. Doesn't fall for the trick. The classic first Sliver desperation play, which is hard cast in the first Sliver. It's nice because the tax gets paid on the Rhystic Study, choking him off mana, and this flip here, as you'll see, is not quite that exciting because without a combo to go off, Silence really isn't doing much for you. I love untapping with this deck. I mean, look at how many permanents I get to untap. So I don't hit a land here, which means I do have to play my draw for turn, which is an Imperial Recruiter. I'm gonna go grab a Dockside because it's actually pretty potent at this table and it'll let me cast my commander with some backup, which is pretty okay. And then I move to combat, sending the majority of the ground forces at Scott and everything in the air at Foss. I wish I could send more at Foss, but he has a 7/7. Unfortunately, this Remorseful Cleric in my hand isn't really going to do much, so I'm very happy to loot that away with the Smuggler's Copter. A lot of super fair stuff happening here out of Dirtle Control, just playing an Arbor Elf and paying for it with Rhystic Study. It does not feel good from Looter's perspective, definitely, having a slow start. So that makes 2 of my opponents that are really stumbling right now, which is, you know, pretty good for me. The fact that 2 of them are also stuck where I am after my really bad mulligan there. However, anytime that there's a good stumble, you can assume that a Thassa's Oracle Tainted Pact is there to follow, which is exactly what happened. Now remember earlier when I mentioned that Gitaxian Probe? Now you see a snap pass here from Foss. Something to note, you gotta see right there up in the hand, a Force of Negation lying waiting to counter this Tainted Pact. So Foss knew that Looter had that and therefore passed his priority to pressure Looter into using up that Force of Negation to stop Scott from winning right here. And now Looter slams down that Force of Negation, exiling the Kinnan from before and luckily also paying for the Rhystic Study. So for me and Foss, this worked out pretty well. Foss actually does miss the Mystic Remora trigger on the Force, which is notable. I think he missed a few in the game, which may have helped him get out of this really intense mana flood situation. And Fish is paid for again for 3 mana, really showing that Foss has nothing in hand. I mean, this is all lining up pretty decently for me, but a Shusher comes down and for those who have played against that card, it is absolutely terrifying to play against. Then a Sylvan Library, which, you know, more card draw for Foss, feeding the Rhystic Study, unfortunately. So this is a prime opportunity for me to take a hold of this game. My opponents are mostly tapped out, there's only a Rhystic Study, and I have this Dockside that's going to give me 6 treasures. Now, the Dockside does go through, which is awesome. I do pay for the Rhystic Study because I don't need the extra mana. I immediately cast Winota because I'm ready to move to combat and get this thing going. I pay for the Rhystic Study, I crew up the Copter, and now I go to combat, triggering Winota 5 times. Before I do the Winota triggers, I loot with the Smuggler's Copter, and I don't really feel like I need this Aethersworn Canonist in my hand, so I get rid of it. I had a land and a Linvala in hand, which just seemed better. And for your entertainment, a genuine reaction by our own Scott.
It's 6 cards?
Now, something really important about Winota is, once the trigger goes off, you can't react to the choosing of the humans. So cards like the ones I'm about to flip just entered the battlefield and your opponents can't respond. My first flip is a Grand Abolisher, which means my opponents can't cast any more spells or abilities on my turn. My next card is Mogcatcher. It allows me for 3 generic mana to tap and put any goblin in my deck directly on the battlefield. It's usually a 1-card combo with things like Goblin Recruiter or Conspicuous Snoop. And maybe as importantly, it allows us to go grab Kiki-Jiki onto the field. Next card locks the board pretty hard. It's Magus of the Moon. And my opponents with all of these non-basic lands can't really handle the fact that they're all mountains now. I miss on my 4th trigger, but on my 5th trigger I hit Recruiter the card. Now because I have Mogcatcher, I really want to get the second half of my combo, which is why I go and grab a Combat Celebrant. It's crazy to think, but we locked down the board in only a single turn, and that's the explosive power that Winota has. Now, my opponents here are just untapping and passing, and that's because of Magus of the Moon. Scoots ends up drawing and then playing a Soul Ring. Now, Foss does get to draw off the Soul Ring because Scoots adamantly refused to pay 5 mana for a Soul Ring, which, you know, I get it. Foss untaps here and doesn't pay for the fish for the first time this game, which does make me a little bit nervous. Magus of the Moon stops Carpet from being triggered, but he does have the draws from Sylvan Library in addition to a Birds, an Elf, and a Chrome Mox for mana. So then he plays a Goblin Bombardment. Now this Bombardment actually could have killed some of my creatures, stopping me from winning here. And he follows up with a Food Chain, which I really was not ready for. I wasn't sure if we were going to lose the game right here, but he actually just passes. And with my Grand Abolisher out, my opponents cannot interact me with on my turn. Oh, look at that untap. So many permanents to untap, ready to claim the game. I love this deck. So here's how I take the game. I play Combat Celebrant, let Scott draw because I need exact mana, and then I activate Mogcatcher to go grab Kiki-Jiki out of my library. Let's go over the combo. So here's how the combo works. You tap Kiki-Jiki, which will make a hasty token copy of Combat Celebrant. That Combat Celebrant will attack. Combat Celebrant has an ability when it attacks where you can exert it, untap all other creatures you control, and you'll get another combat after this. So because of that, it will untap the Kiki-Jiki. You'll go to your next combat, you'll make another copy of the Combat Celebrant, and therefore you can now infinitely attack your opponents down. If they have any blockers, the damage stays on, so eventually those creatures will die, and the Combat Celebrant will get through, and it will deal infinite damage to all your opponents. Thank you for coming and joining me for my first gameplay video here on Comedian MTG. If you like the program, please feel free to go check us out on Patreon. With that Patreon, you will have exclusive access to our Comedian MTG Discord. We're going to try and cultivate a really great community, excited to talk about these games. We have perks such as, choosing decks that may come onto the show, things like that. So it's a lot of really exciting stuff. In addition to that stuff, any of the normal YouTube stuff you can do, like liking and subscribing, helps out a ton. So please, that stuff's all free. Feel free to jump down below and do that. Thank you so much for joining me. Have an amazing week. Bye!